He thought a single kick could humiliate a royal guard, but he never imagined the storm of military precision he was about to unleash. Michael Langston adjusted the collar of his sleek black tracksuit as he stood in the early morning light outside Buckingham Palace, the iconic London landmark, casting long shadows across the courtyard. At 35 years old, Michael was a towering figure at 6'2", with a lean, muscular build that spoke of years spent in martial arts dojos. His dark hair was cropped short, his jaw set, with the kind of confidence that came from being one of America's most decorated taekwondo champions. With 4 international titles under his belt and a chain of high-end dojos across New York, Michael had built a reputation as a fighter who never backed down. His Instagram bio said it all: undefeated, unbreakable, unstoppable. Today, though, he wasn't in a ring or a dojo. He was on a European tour with his training crew, and Buckingham Palace was just another stop on his itinerary, or so he thought. The morning air was crisp, and a small crowd of tourists had already gathered, their cameras ready to capture the changing of the guard ceremony. Michael stood out among them, his designer tracksuit and cocky swagger setting him apart from the families and retirees snapping photos. He glanced at the royal guard, standing at attention near the palace gates, her scarlet tunic and bearskin cap a stark contrast to the modern, high-tech gear Michael was used to in his fighting world. The guard, Emily Harper, was 29 years old, a seasoned soldier with a decade of service in the British Army. But to Michael, she was just a prop, a ceremonial figure who looked like she belonged in a history book, not a battlefield. This is what they call security. Michael scoffed, his voice loud enough to draw a few curious glances from nearby tourists. He adjusted the smartwatch on his wrist, a gift from his latest sponsor, and smirked at his entourage. In my world, a fighter who stands still like that is just begging to get knocked out. His 4 training partners, all members of Langston's elite combat system, nodded in agreement, their matching team jackets forming a visual barrier around their leader. They were a tight-knit group, forged through years of tournament competitions, and they followed Michael's lead without question. Remember Paris last year? One of them, a wiry man named Ethan, said with a grin, that French champ who claimed he was untouchable, you took him down in under a minute. Michael's eyes narrowed as he studied Emily Harper, who stood motionless, her gaze fixed forward with disciplined precision. There was nothing in her expression to suggest the 4 tours of duty she'd served in conflict zones, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and a classified operation in Yemen that had earned her a quiet medal ceremony at the Ministry of Defense. To Michael, she was just a symbol of outdated tradition, her posture rigid, and her ceremonial rifle held at an angle that screamed vulnerability. Look at her, he muttered, a mix of professional assessment and derision in his tone. No center of gravity, no defensive stance. All that ceremonial nonsense would get her destroyed in a real fight. A few tourists nearby glanced nervously at Michael's group, sensing the growing tension. Among them was Colonel Richard Bennett, a retired officer with 35 years of service in the Royal Marines. Dressed in civilian clothes, his weathered face and military bearing were unmistakable as he paused during his morning walk to observe the scene. The medals pinned discreetly to his jacket caught the light. A testament to battles fought and sacrifices made, his expression remained neutral, but his instincts told him trouble was brewing. Let me show you what a real fighter looks like, Michael announced, stepping closer to Emily. The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, her disciplined stillness a stark contrast to Michael's fluid movements. A real fighter is always ready, always moving, always aware, he said, demonstrating a defensive stance, his body shifting with the precision of a seasoned martial artist. He began circling Emily, analyzing her form with the critical eye of a champion. Look at this poor woman. They've trained all the fight out of her. Michael approached from different angles, deliberately stepping into Emily's peripheral vision, testing her reaction, or lack thereof. In a real combat situation, this kind of rigidity gets you killed, he said, his voice carrying to the growing crowd. Some tourists looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few entertained by the unexpected show. A family from Australia quietly ushered their children away, the parents exchanging disapproving glances. You know what we're looking at here? Michael gestured to Emily as if she were a museum exhibit. The difference between ceremony and combat These guards are performing, not fighting. He executed a series of quick jabs that stopped just short of Emily's face, showing off his control and speed. Every move I make is designed for one purpose: victory. Colonel Bennett had moved closer now, his military bearing evident despite his casual attire. His eyes never left Michael's increasingly aggressive display, and a flicker of concern crossed his face. Not for Emily's safety, but for what might happen if the guard was forced to break protocols. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael called out, assuming the role of an impromptu ringside announcer. "What you're witnessing is the fundamental difference between British tradition and actual combat effectiveness." He gestured toward Emily with a theatrical sweep of his arm. "These guards represent a bygone era, when standing in formation was considered military prowess." Michael's training partners had positioned themselves strategically around Emily, forming what martial arts practitioners would recognize as a demonstration circle. Their matching jackets created a visual barrier, turning the public space into an improvised arena. "This is Derek." Michael gestured to the tallest of his entourage, a man with a stoic expression and hands wrapped in professional-grade tape, three-time national taekwondo champion. "And Lucas here," he nodded toward a compact, muscular man with a fighter's scarred knuckles, former lightweight kickboxing title holder. "We train fighters who win actual combat sports, not ceremonial soldiers who win costume contests." The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the spectacle of Michael's impromptu demonstration. A British family near the back exchanged glances of discomfort, the mother placing protective hands on her children's shoulders. An elderly man, with a veteran's pin on his coat, shook his head in quiet disapproval. "Watch how a real fighter moves," Michael instructed, executing a series of lightning-fast punches that stopped mere inches from Emily's torso. "Every movement has purpose. Intent, lethal potential. Nothing wasted, nothing for show." This is fighting efficiency developed through thousands of hours facing actual opponents. Not standing at attention, Colonel Bennett began making his way through the crowd, his military bearing parting the onlookers with quiet authority. His face betrayed concern, not for Emily, but for the consequences of Michael's actions. "You see the problem with military training," Michael projected his voice like a seminar leader, "is that it's designed for group thinking. Follow orders, maintain formation, sacrifice individuality." He circled Emily, analyzing her posture with professional scrutiny. "Martial arts is about achieving personal excellence, about pushing human capabilities to their absolute limit." Michael executed a spinning kick that whistled past Emily's ear, close enough that she would have felt the displacement of air. The crowd gasped, several people taking involuntary steps backward. "Notice she doesn't even blink," Michael said with mock admiration. "That's not discipline, folks. That's fear. The fear of breaking rules, of thinking independently." He positioned himself directly in front of Emily, hands on hips, studying her impassive face. "In my dojo, I teach people to overcome that fear, to react, to engage with reality." A man with a young son pulled the child away from the scene, murmuring, "This is disrespectful. We're leaving." Several others followed, uncomfortable with the escalating tension, but Michael was too caught up in his performance to notice. "I think we need a practical demonstration," he announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man accustomed to commanding attention in competition rings. "Theory is fine, but nothing teaches like experience." He adjusted his stance, the movement fluid and purposeful. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to show you why static defense, the kind these guards represent, is fundamentally obsolete." Colonel Bennett moved forward with urgent purpose, but Michael's training partners closed ranks, creating a human barrier between the retired officer and their leader. Ethan, the wiry man with a fighter's broken nose, placed a hand on Bennett's chest. "Let the demonstration finish." "Old man," he said, his tone conversational, but his intent unmistakable. "Educational purposes." Bennett's eyes narrowed. "That guard is not what you think she is," he said quietly. "Your friend is making a serious mistake." Michael had begun a meticulous warm-up routine, stretching his shoulders and neck with practiced efficiency. "The most dangerous delusion in combat sports," he lectured, rotating his wrists, "is believing that tradition equals effectiveness. These guards stand here looking impressive, but they've sacrificed practical skills for ceremony." He moved into position, his stance shifting subtly into what trained fighters would recognize as a competition-ready posture. "Now, for my final demonstration," he announced, his voice taking on the quality of a ringside announcer. I'm going to show you exactly why this type of static defense fails against modern combat techniques. Michael Langston's confidence was unshakable as he prepared for what he thought would be the ultimate demonstration of his superiority. The morning light bathed Buckingham Palace's courtyard in a soft golden glow, but the air was thick with tension. A crowd of tourists had gathered, their cameras forgotten, as they watched Michael circle Emily Harper, the royal guard, standing at attention near the palace gates. Emily's scarlet tunic and bearskin cap gleamed under the sunlight, her posture rigid and her ceremonial rifle held at a precise angle. To Michael, she was nothing more than a ceremonial relic, a perfect target for his lesson in modern combat. He had no idea what he was about to unleash. In a real combat situation, Michael declared, his voice booming with the authority of a man who'd spent years commanding attention in martial arts rings. Maintaining situational awareness is critical. This guard has surrendered her awareness to ceremony. He moved through a complex approach sequence, the kind he'd used to set up championship-winning strikes in tournaments across the globe. His training partners, Ethan, Derek, Lucas, and a burly man named Travis, stood in a semicircle behind him, their matching jackets creating a visual barrier that isolated Emily from the crowd. A defender who won't adapt, Michael continued, his movements accelerating, who can't respond to changing conditions, who remains rigidly committed to outdated protocols. She's a sitting duck. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Sensing that a line was about to be crossed, several tourists stepped back, their expressions a mix of unease and morbid curiosity. A British mother near the front clutched her young daughter's hand, whispering, "We should go." But the child's wide-eyed stare kept them rooted in place. Colonel Richard Bennett, the retired Royal Marines officer, stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered face tight with concern. He'd tried to intervene, but Michael's entourage had blocked his path. Their casual dismissal let the demonstration finish. Old man, only heightening his unease. Bennett's instincts, honed through decades of military service, told him this wasn't going to end the way Michael expected. Michael launched into a blindingly fast combination, each move flowing into the next with years of practiced precision. He shadowboxed around Emily, his jabs and kicks whistling through the air, stopping just short of contact to show off his control. "See how easy this would be," he said, his tone mocking as he pivoted on his heel. In a real fight, she'd already be on the ground. He turned to the crowd with a theatrical grin, soaking in their attention, then spun back toward Emily for his final move. A spinning heel kick aimed directly at her face. The impact was deafening, a sharp crack that cut through the morning air like a gunshot. Michael's foot connected solidly with the side of Emily's face, sending her bearskin cap flying in a dramatic arc against the blue London sky. The cap soared through the air, a symbol of tradition knocked loose by modern arrogance, and landed on the courtyard stones with a muffled thud. The force of the blow was enough to fell most opponents instantly. Michael had used this move to knock out seasoned fighters in international tournaments. He recovered his balance with the efficiency of a champion, a triumphant smile spreading across his lips as he turned to the crowd. "And that," he announced, his voice brimming with pride, "is why." His words died in his throat as he registered what was happening before him. Emily Harper hadn't fallen. She hadn't even staggered. Her head had snapped sideways with the impact, a thin line of blood tracing its way down from her temple. But her body had absorbed the blow with a resilience that defied belief. Her ceremonial rifle remained in her grip, her posture still perfect, as if the kick had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Her eyes, which had been fixed forward in disciplined stillness, now locked onto Michael's for the first time, and what he saw in them sent a chill down his spine. There was no pain, no fear, only a cold, focused clarity that Michael, as a seasoned fighter, recognized immediately. It was the look of a predator sizing up its prey. "Oh, crap," Ethan whispered from the sidelines, the bravado evaporating from his voice as he took an involuntary step back. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The crowd held its collective breath, their earlier curiosity replaced by a dawning realization that they were witnessing something far more serious than a stunt. Colonel Bennett, who had been speaking quietly into his phone to alert palace security, paused, his expression shifting from concern to a grim anticipation. Michael's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He'd expected Emily to crumble, to prove his point about the futility of ceremonial training. Instead, he was staring into the eyes of someone who had endured far worse than a spinning heel kick, and who was about to show him exactly what that meant. Then Emily moved. It wasn't the clumsy response of a ceremonial figure unaccustomed to combat. It was the precise, economical motion of a soldier who had stalked targets through war zones and survived ambushes that would have broken lesser fighters. Her ceremonial rifle clattered to the stones as she closed the distance between herself and Michael with a speed that belied her formal attire. Michael, to his credit, recognized the danger instantly and shifted into a defensive stance, his years of training kicking in. "Now we're talking," he said, forcing a grin to mask the unease creeping into his chest. "Let's see what they actually teach you soldiers." Emily's first strike interrupted Michael's taunt with brutal efficiency. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a textbook perfect combat move delivered with the force of someone who had applied such techniques in life or death situations. She drove a sharp jab into Michael's midsection, targeting a pressure point with surgical precision. Michael blocked instinctively, his reflexes responding before his brain could fully process what was happening. But the impact still sent him staggering backward, the air rushing out of his lungs in a sharp gasp. Emily didn't speak, didn't posture, didn't play to the crowd. She moved with the focused intensity of someone executing a mission parameter rather than performing for spectators. Her expression remained professionally neutral, even as she systematically dismantled Michael's defenses with clinical precision. Michael attempted a counterattack, launching a high kick that had won him tournaments across 4 continents. But Emily sidestepped the move with ease, catching his leg in midair. With one decisive motion, she twisted his ankle and used his momentum against him, taking the champion to the ground in a controlled takedown. The impact knocked the wind from Michael's lungs, his back slamming against the courtyard stones with a heavy thud. His eyes widened with the sudden, humbling recognition that he was drastically outmatched. Emily maintained her position, one knee precisely placed on Michael's sternum, applying just enough pressure to immobilize him without causing serious injury. Michael's surprise gave way to a competitor's instinct to counter, but each attempt to regain the advantage was met with subtle adjustments that rendered his extensive training ineffective. "Stay down." Emily spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the quiet authority of command rather than the anger of someone who'd been assaulted. "This ends now." Colonel Bennett stepped forward, Michael's entourage no longer attempting to block his approach. "I believe," he addressed the martial artist with military precision, "you've just received a practical education in the difference between performing combat and experiencing it." Michael struggled ineffectively against Emily's hold, his championship confidence crumbling under the weight of reality. "What the hell?" he gasped, his voice strained. "You can't—" "Guard Harper can do considerably more than she's currently demonstrating." Bennett cut him off, his tone conversational, yet edged with steel. Before her assignment to the Queen's Guard, she served with the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, 4 combat deployments, 3 distinguished service commendations. He paused, letting the information sink in. "The ceremonial duties you've been mocking require the highest levels of discipline from soldiers who've already proven themselves in actual combat." The crowd had reformed at a safer distance, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Palace security personnel were approaching rapidly across the courtyard, their radios crackling with urgent communications. "SR, Derek," one of Michael's training partners, repeated, his previous bravado completely evaporated. "Those women are not to be messed with." "Quite right," Bennett finished for him. "Every guard standing ceremonial duty is an active duty soldier with extensive combat training, and in many cases, battlefield experience. The discipline you mistook for weakness, Mr. Langston, is the same discipline that keeps them effective in situations where your tournament training would prove fatally inadequate." Emily maintained her position, her breathing controlled and even despite the exertion of the brief confrontation. The thin line of blood from Michael's kick had traced a path down her cheek, but her expression remained professionally detached, the same focus she'd maintained during night operations in environments far more dangerous than this palace courtyard. Michael had stopped struggling, a new awareness dawning in his eyes. He'd been wrong, catastrophically wrong, and the consequences were only just beginning. Michael Langston lay pinned to the cold stones of Buckingham Palace's courtyard, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. Emily Harper's knee pressed firmly against his sternum, her grip unyielding but precise, just enough to keep him immobilized without causing harm. The thin line of blood on her cheek glistened in the morning light, a stark reminder of Michael's reckless kick, but her expression remained as composed as it had been during her ceremonial duty. The crowd of tourists stood at a safe distance, their earlier curiosity replaced by a mix of shock and reverence. Palace security personnel had arrived, their boots echoing across the courtyard as they surrounded the scene, radios crackling with urgent communications. Colonel Richard Bennett, the retired Royal Marines officer who had witnessed the entire incident, stood nearby, his weathered face a mask of quiet authority. He glanced at Michael's entourage, Ethan, Derek, Lucas, and Travis, who had shrunk back, their earlier bravado replaced by a stunned silence. "I trust this demonstration has been educational," Bennett said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military service. He turned to the security officer who had taken charge of the scene, a stern-looking man in a crisp uniform. "Lieutenant, I believe Guard Harper has the situation well in hand." The security officer, Lieutenant Daniels, nodded, his expression hardening as he took in the scene, the bearskin cap still lying on the stones, the blood on Emily's face, and Michael's crumpled form beneath her. "Mr. Langston here decided to test the reflexes of the Queen's Guard in a rather direct fashion," Bennett continued, his tone matter-of-fact, but laced with disapproval. "Assault on a serving member of His Majesty's forces. Disruption of ceremonial duties. I suspect the Crown Prosecution Service will have several charges to enumerate." Michael's mind reeled as the reality of his situation sank in. He'd come to Buckingham Palace expecting to make a point, to show the world the superiority of his modern combat skills over what he'd dismissed as outdated tradition. Instead, he'd been taken down in seconds by a woman he'd underestimated, a soldier whose training far surpassed his own. She moved like... Michael stammered, his voice hoarse as he looked up at Emily, who hadn't spoken since her initial command to stay down. "Guard Harper can do considerably more than she's currently demonstrating," Bennett interjected, his tone edged with steel. "Her service with the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, 4 combat deployments, 3 distinguished service commendations, means she's faced threats far more dangerous than a tournament fighter with an ego." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The discipline you mocked, Mr. Langston, is what allows her to remain effective in situations where your training would falter." Lieutenant Daniels approached Emily, giving her a subtle nod. "Guard Harper, we'll take it from here." Emily released her hold on Michael, rising to her feet with the same fluid precision that had characterized her response. She stepped back, resuming a posture of parade ground attention despite the absence of her bearskin cap. The thin line of blood on her cheek was the only sign of the confrontation, but her discipline remained unbroken, her gaze fixed forward as if nothing had happened. Michael sat up slowly, his body aching from the takedown, his mind racing with a mix of humiliation and awe. Palace security escorted him to his feet, their grips firm but professional as they led him toward the security office for processing. The crowd formed a respectful semicircle around Colonel Bennett, their cameras forgotten as they absorbed the reality of what they had witnessed. Bennett stood with parade ground precision, his civilian clothes doing little to hide his military bearing. "The uniform these guards wear," he gestured toward Emily, who had resumed her post with perfect composure, "represents far more than ceremonial tradition. It's earned through the same rigorous training that produces our nation's combat forces." A tourist from Canada raised his hand tentatively, his voice hesitant. "But why have them just standing there if they're actual soldiers? Seems like a waste of training." Bennett's smile held a patient understanding, an interesting question, and a common misconception. These ceremonial duties rotate among active duty units. The soldiers standing guard today might have been conducting counterterrorism operations 6 months ago and may deploy to a conflict zone 6 months from now. He gestured toward Emily with respectful acknowledgement. Their ceremonial stillness isn't their defining capability. It's simply one expression of the discipline that makes them effective in all aspects of their service. As the crowd dispersed, some tourists lingered, their whispers filled with newfound respect for the royal guard. A palace staff member approached Emily with a first aid kit, carefully cleaning the blood from her face while she maintained her position. Her eyes remained fixed forward throughout the process, her discipline unbroken, even during the necessary intervention. To stand guard at these posts, Bennett continued, his voice carrying to the remaining onlookers, is considered one of the highest honors in military service. These soldiers are selected not just for their ceremonial precision, but for their exemplary service records. The bearskin cap and scarlet tunic aren't costumes. They're recognition of excellence. The following day, Emily Harper emerged from the guard quarters in her standard combat uniform rather than her ceremonial dress. Having completed her shift, a military physician had examined the impact site of Michael's kick, noting with professional approval her instinctive reaction that had turned what could have been a jaw-breaking blow into a glancing impact. "You rolled with it perfectly," the doctor had commented while applying antiseptic to the cut. Textbook defensive reaction. Emily had merely nodded. Her ability to minimize impact damage had been drilled into her during countless hours of close-quarters combat training that emphasized survival over spectacle, efficiency over showmanship. The medical assessment confirmed what she already knew: no significant injury, just superficial bruising that would fade within days. She'd endured far worse in training exercises, let alone combat deployments in regions whose names rarely appeared in news reports. Inside the security office, Michael Langston sat alone, his designer tracksuit now rumpled, his championship confidence deflated by the reality of criminal charges and the humbling experience of being so thoroughly outmatched. When Emily entered, he stood immediately, his body language communicating a respect entirely absent from their earlier encounter. "Guard Harper," the security officer nodded. "Mr. Langston has been formally charged, but he requested this conversation before processing continues." Emily gave a professional nod, neither friendly nor hostile. "Understood." The officer stepped out, closing the door behind him, leaving the two alone. For a moment, they regarded each other in silence, the martial arts champion and the soldier, each recognizing something in the other that had been obscured by Michael's assumptions. "That was SRR training, wasn't it?" Michael finally asked, his voice quieter than before. "The performative quality gone. I've trained with special forces guys from 3 countries. Never seen anything quite like what you did. We adapt techniques to operational requirements," Emily replied simply, neither confirming nor denying the specifics of her military background. Michael let out a humorless laugh, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" Man to woman, Emily took the offered seat, her posture military straight, even in this informal setting. "I'm listening. I screwed up," Michael admitted bluntly, his eyes dropping to his hands. Hands that had won championships, but had proven ineffective against Emily's disciplined response. "Completely misjudged what I was looking at. When I saw you standing there, I saw—" He hesitated, searching for words. "A target," Emily finished for him, her voice calm but direct. "Not a fellow professional." Michael nodded, genuine regret crossing his face. "That's exactly it. In my world, everything's about demonstrating superiority, proving you're the best." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I didn't understand what I was actually looking at." "Few civilians do," Emily replied, her tone neutral but not unkind. "That's by design." The stillness, Michael said, his voice softening as he processed the lesson. "I thought it was just ceremony, just tradition, but it's actually control, isn't it?" Emily nodded slightly. "The same control that allows us to stand motionless for hours allows us to make split-second decisions under fire without panicking." Michael leaned back in his chair, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "In competition, everything I do is designed to be seen, to impress judges and spectators. What you did?" He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. There was nothing showy about it, just effective. "Different training for different purposes," Emily said, echoing Colonel Bennett's earlier assessment. "My job isn't to win points or impress audiences. It's to complete objectives and protect lives. They're going to make an example of me, aren't they?" Michael asked, glancing toward the door where the security officer waited. "Likely," Emily confirmed, her tone matter-of-fact. Assaulting a guard on duty is taken very seriously. Michael accepted this with surprising composure, straightening in his chair as if trying to reclaim some of his dignity. Fair enough. I earned whatever comes next. He paused, then added, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the kick, but for the disrespect before that. For not recognizing what was in front of me. Emily studied him for a moment, assessing the sincerity of his apology. Whatever she saw apparently satisfied her, because she gave a single, precise nod. Acknowledged? As she stood to leave, Michael spoke again, his voice quieter. One last question. When I kicked you, most people would have gone down, or at least staggered. You barely moved. How? Emily paused at the door, her expression unchanging, but a hint of professional respect entering her voice. When you've had real IEDs detonate nearby, she said. A kick to the face is just another Tuesday. She left without waiting for a response, returning to her unit and her duties with the same disciplined precision that had defined her response to the incident. Behind her, Michael remained seated, faced with the humbling realization that there were different kinds of strength in the world, and that he had only mastered one of the lesser varieties. Back at her post the following day, Emily Harper stood at attention, her bearskin cap restored, her uniform immaculate. No trace remained of the previous day's confrontation, but the tourists who approached now did so with a new respect, their cameras more discreet, their admiration more genuine. Colonel Bennett, passing by during his morning walk, paused to observe this guard and the respectful distance maintained by the visitors. He smiled slightly, nodding in satisfaction, before continuing on his way. Sometimes, he reflected, the most effective lessons about respect weren't taught through words, but through demonstrations that revealed the truth behind appearances. Michael Langston had come to Buckingham Palace to prove a point, but in the end, he'd learned a far greater lesson. True strength isn't about showmanship or titles. It's about discipline, resilience, and the quiet courage that lies beneath the surface.